Good evening. It is 5 o'clock. I see we have quite a few participants, so I'm going to get started. First of all, a few little things we'd like you to do. If you wouldn't mind turning your video off for now and your mute, put your mute on if you wouldn't mind, so we can focus on our speakers. That would be terrific. We are going to give everybody an opportunity to be on camera and to ask their questions. So good evening, I'm Ashley Gardner. I'm with the Women's Museum of California. I have the pleasure of serving on the board of the Women's Museum. I've been attached to them since 2001 or 2, and it's a great pleasure to see where we've come from and where we've been and where we're headed in this crazy new world. So we're here tonight to talk about Title IX, and I know that if you ask most people what's Title IX about, I think if they even knew what it was, they would say, well, it's about sports, girls' sports, sports on campus. And I think they'd be partially right. But because tonight's presentation is called, hello, but I'm going to ask you to turn your video off, please, Lily, if you don't mind. Not that Lily, this Lily. It's really about more than sports. So we're gonna find out about that as much as we can with our speakers tonight. The whole idea of having conversations is to enrich us and to move us past what we don't understand. And that's one of the main things that we like to do here at the Women's Museum. So I'm going to get started with our guest speakers, and I'm going to disappear for a little while and so I can listen and learn what Title IX is really about. So I am introducing, and you can see on the screen, Anne Hoiberg, a very familiar face in feminist circles here in San Diego. I've been working on issues at the museum and other organizations for many, many years. 25 years as a research psychologist with the federal government, 130 scientific articles that she published to her credit. She's been past president of 3 organizations, current president here at the Women's Museum, I think from 2010 to 2015, so a long stretch, and here she is again leading us through a COVID experience like no other. She's published a couple of books here at the museum called Women of the Gaslamp Quarter, take her tour if you get a chance, and also Tears of War, Stories of Refugee Stories. And she is very interested in women's rights, human rights, trafficking, violence against women, political participation, and the United Nations, which she goes to the conference every year since, 23, 24 years, except for this year. I'm just going to admit a couple more people in here. Welcome. And Lily Lazarus, I discovered when Googling Title IX. I wanted to find out who knew anything about Title IX. And Title IX, she published an article on the new regulations that just came down from the Department of Education. She's working right now as a journalist at the Santa Barbara Independent, just up the road from us. But she is a full-time student at Tulane University in New Orleans. And she is the head of the Sexual Violence Support Group. And she's also the editor of Views at Tulane University, and works with survivors and addresses to the Title IX office there at Tulane. So we're really thrilled to have this exemplary young woman here with us today to talk about how she, as a college campus student, may be affected by the regulations. And then Anne's going to give us more of an in-depth look at the history of Title IX. I think I've covered it. Did I cover it? We're good? All right, we're good to go. So Anne, I'm going to disappear and see if I can figure out how to get your slides up on time. If I don't, I'm sure you'll forgive me. So take it away, Anne.
Oh, thank you, Ashley. And I'm thrilled to be able to give this presentation. As many of you know, I've been involved at the Women's Museum of California for about 15 years. And you cannot be affiliated with a museum without being interested in history. So I have become an amateur historian during these past 15 years, and I can't tell you how enriching it all has been. So I do want to start out by talking about 4 incredible women. 3 were legislators, and 1 was another woman who just pitched in and helped as often as she could. So we'll start out by talking about these four women. Then I'll give a definition of Title IX, talk about what it really covers, some of the California legislation, and then I'll turn it over to Lily May to talk about what we can expect with the new regulations. So we'll start out by talking about Edith Green. So I don't know if we can get the picture of Edith Green up. Ashley, can you do that?
I think I can. Just bear with me a second. I think I've got Edith right here. Look at that. Thank you, Edith. You'll even put her full. Oops, she's here somewhere. There she is.
Edith Green was born in Oregon, and when she was in high school, she told one of her teachers that she really wanted to be an engineer. And the teacher said, no, 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 you should become a school teacher. And that's what Edith Green did. And then she became more and more educated. She ended up being a university professor, and she learned that she was making less money than her male counterparts. Amazing, right? Well, Edith Green eventually decided that she needed to serve in our House of Representatives. So she was elected from Oregon. She showed up at the House of Representatives in 1955. Now, she started working on pay equity. She was really concerned about this issue, especially in higher education. So she worked for 8 years on the Equal Pay Act of 1963. It was finally enacted, the Equal Pay Act of 1963. Now, her concern also was about higher education, so she created legislation on that also. Now, in the meantime, President Kennedy had been elected, and he formed, through the help of Eleanor Roosevelt, the U.S. Commission on the Status of Women. And they did a study on what is the status of women throughout the United States. So that report came out in 1963 also. And it showed that women had secondary status throughout the United States. And we actually suffered from economic disadvantages. Oh, well, this was shocking to so many of us, and especially to people like Edith Green, who couldn't believe that here in the United States it was pervasive. Well, at the same time, another amazing woman, Martha Griffiths, also served in our U.S. Congress. So we can put up the picture of Martha Griffiths. Now, Martha Griffiths grew up in Michigan. She married, and she and her husband both wanted to go to Harvard Law School. Harvard Law School accepted her husband, but not her. Well, they went back to Michigan and went to law school there, and she served in capacity as an attorney. But she really decided that she needed to run for Congress. So she ran for Congress and was elected also to the House of Representatives. Now, Martha was really interested in what was coming up, and that was the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Now, she looked at Title VII, and Title VII stated that you could not discriminate on the basis of race, color, religion, or national origin. What was missing? Well, she said, well, we need to include women. So she met with a senator from Virginia, and he played along with her. And he said, oh, sure, we'll include sex or gender into the Civil Rights Act. And so when he introduced that on the floor of the House of Representatives, he was laughed at. The men just thought that was some silliest thing. Why would you include women? Discrimination against women? That wouldn't happen. Well, he was thinking too that if they included women or sex, along with the 4 other criteria, it would go down to defeat. But interestingly enough, they added sex, so it now became color, race, sex, national origin, and religion. Those 5 things. You cannot discriminate throughout this country on the basis of those 5. It passed the Civil Rights of 1964. Well, Martha Griffiths was thrilled. And then she moved on to the Equal Rights Amendment and had that passed in both chambers of our Senate and the House of Representatives. So what an accomplishment by 1972. Well, in the meantime, a woman named Bernice Sandler was working on discrimination at the college and university level. And she identified 269 college and universities that were guilty of sex discrimination in these universities. She filed 269 complaints against these universities. Well, in the meantime, Patsy Mink showed up at the House of Representatives, and you can put up her picture, Ashley. Patsy Mink grew up in Hawaii. Now, she went off to the university. She ended up getting her bachelor's degree from the University of Nebraska. And I probably should mention, to the benefit of all of our members of AAUW, not only was Edith Green a member of AAUW, but so was Patsy Mink. Patsy Mink wanted to go to medical school. So after she graduated, she applied to 20 medical schools. She was turned down by all 20. Can you imagine? Then she decided, well, she'd go to law school, so she enrolled at the University of Chicago. She became an attorney, returned to Hawaii, and guess what? No legal firm would hire her. So she opened her own practice, and she survived for many years in that capacity, and also doing work in different political endeavors, and she ended up being elected in 1965 to the House of Representatives. And there too, she became a member of the Committee on Education and Labor, and she went to work on Title IX. So she became the mother of Title IX. And what I think is fascinating, Edith Green was called the mother of higher education. Martha Griffiths was called the mother of the ERA. Blanche Sandler was called the godmother of Title IX because she did all that research looking at the complaints of discrimination on all these college campuses. And now we have Patsy Mink, and she became known as the mother of Title IX. Well, what is the definition of Title IX? Well, let me just read that. No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Well, what does that really cover? Well, if we look at what's included under Title IX, let me just look at the areas of education, and they include recruitment, administration, and housing. You can't discriminate on that basis. Career and technical education, pregnant, parenting, and/or married students, science, technology, engineering, and math, or STEM, which is something that AAUW members are dedicated to promoting, sexual harassment and assault, comparable facilities and access to course offerings, financial assistance, student health services and insurance benefits, harassment based on gender identity, and athletics. So there we come to athletics. Now, those Title IX categories were to be looked at by the Office for Civil Rights. The Office for Civil Rights was charged with enforcement of Title IX. Meanwhile, here in California, our legislators were passing bills about gender equity. And so over the years, there have been many, many bills dating back to 1976. And that was the first year of the very first piece of gender equity laws. In 1982, the Education Code added the Sex Equity in the Education Act, and that provided statutory framework to address gender discrimination. And in 1984, we had a definition of sexual harassment enacted here in California. And I would like to just mention that in my employment as a federal employee, I also had as one of my collateral duties in that I was a certified instructor of prevention of sexual harassment. And I used to survey a lot of facilities here in San Diego. And I remember going into one scientist's office and his walls were plastered with Playboy bunnies and the centerfold from the magazine. I don't know if the magazine still exists. I told him, you have to take that down. We're all trying to have professional offices here in a professional facility. Take down those horrible pictures, which he had to do. The focus was to create professional settings in all federal employment facilities. So that's what we were working on back in the 1980s and 1990s. Other pieces of legislation were passed, sex equity in education. Also, we worked here in California on uniform complaint procedures. In 1993, there were grounds for suspension, expulsion for acts of sexual harassment. Those were added to our laws here in California. Then the higher education portion in Title III, Chapter 4.5, stresses equity in higher education, and that includes sex equity also. And then Assemblywoman Jackie Spear in 1993 introduced an assembly bill to add gender equity to the coordinated compliance review process. So here in California, our legislators have been busy. And now I'd just like to return to looking at, well, what was the federal government doing along with Title IX? Well, back in 1990, our legislature back in Washington passed the Clery Act. Well, the Clery Act pertained to this horrible case where Jeannie Clary had been raped and murdered by another student in her dormitory. Now, her parents were, of course, devastated, and they sued the university back in Pennsylvania, and they said, we didn't know that there were crimes committed on this campus. If we had known that, we would never have sent our dear Jeannie to this university. They sued the university and were awarded over $2 million, and they created a nonprofit to really work on looking at what universities are doing to comply with Title IX. So now it's required under the Clery Act that all universities and colleges must prepare a report of sexual harassment on their campuses, and that must be publicized. So that's especially important. And if you don't comply, a university can be challenged and fined. And some of those fines are pretty high. Now, during the Obama administration, there were two pieces of legislation that were enacted under Title IX, one in 2011 and another in 2014. And out of those, most universities and colleges created comprehensive programs to deal with rape and sexual assault, sexual harassment on college campuses. Now, at San Diego State, they've created an amazing program called Let's Talk, and it covers all aspects of Title IX, what it involves, how important consent is when it pertains to filing a suit, how do you file, what kind of medical care do you need, what have you. It's all outlined in San Diego State University's program called Let's Talk. And I'm sure this is included in every entering student's packet. Also at the University of California at San Diego, they have what's called CARE at the Sexual Assault Resource Center. And that too is very comprehensive and covers everything that a student needs to know if they are a victim of sexual harassment. So I think I have covered as much as I'd like to cover at this point. I'm now going to turn the floor over to Lily May, and then I'll be back to share with you some recommendations that were created by Alicia Hetman, who heads the Title IX program through AAUW California. So take it away, Lily.
Thank you so much, Anne. I am so happy to be here speaking with you guys and just to be able to explain my experience and my research and what I've really dedicated the greater part of my college career in doing. So just a little background on me and what I do. Ashley, I believe that you turned my video off on accident. I am a college student at Tulane University, and I began my work in Title IX in around 2011 when I felt that my university did not support me and did not have the adequate services to protect survivors and to assist allies, which I think is crucial within Title IX, but more importantly because in 2017, Tulane released a massive document in which they did a climate survey polling students about sexual assault, and they found that 25% of the entire student body had been a victim of sexual assault during their time at Tulane, which is a massive number. It is indeed higher than the national average. And so as a woman, I was startled by the fact that I didn't feel like my university was doing enough. And I began my support group in my sorority to assist survivors and help educate allies on what they could be doing and the resources that they had, which were not easily accessible via the internet or even when you went to go speak to the Title IX office. Following that, I used my career at the newspaper to write an article, an opinion piece on what I felt Tulane was doing wrong, which was met with disdain from the administration, but now has become a very productive conversation. And recently I read the 2,000-page document issued by Betsy DeVos that completely overhauled Title IX for arguably the first time since it was enacted into law. I think it's important before I discuss Title IX to understand some basic statistics about sexual assault in the United States, particularly that on average, sexual assault occurs every 73 seconds in America. which if you think about it is basically every minute. And among these cases, young adults between the age 18 to 34 make up 54% of sexual assault cases. That predominantly represents the college age and mostly women, although we don't have adequate resources of addressing how many men are assaulted due to stigma. We can assume that around 10% of men within that age bracket are also victims of sexual assault. And overall, 1 out of 6 women survives an attempted or completed sexual assault within their lifetime. But college-age students between the age 18 to 24 are 3 times more likely than an average woman to experience sexual violence. So basically, in total, for college women, that's 1 in 5 who will be a victim of sexual assault or violence by the end of their graduation. And for women who identify as LGBTQ+, that statistic is even higher. The worst part about this all is the fact that sexual assault is the most underreported crime in America. According to the Department of Justice, 80% of sexual assault cases are never reported. And the way that you report sexual assault cases on college campuses is via the Title IX office. So now I'm going to go through what happened to Title IX. Title IX, as Anne explained, basically bans discrimination on the basis of sex in an educational setting. The Department of Education decided to replace the existing Title IX statute that was most recently revised in 2011. Since it issued these revisions, it was immediately criticized by lawyers, politicians, civil rights groups, and colleges who view the new guidelines as unfairly tilting the process of investigating sexual harassment and assault in favor of the accused and not the survivor. It also puts the survivor's chances into jeopardy of whether or not they will receive justice. One of the most notable changes is the way that they changed the definition of sexual harassment or misconduct. Under the Obama administration, sexual harassment was defined as unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature. This seems pretty straightforward, to the point. It allows people to interpret it in a way that would address less severe, less violent acts of sexual assault. Now, the Trump administration has reworded this as unwelcome conduct on the basis of sex that is so severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive that it effectively denies a person equal access to the recipient's education program or activity. In my opinion, I don't think that definition makes a whole lot of sense. It also neglects the fact that low-level sexual misconduct can escalate quickly into more serious matters. And most people that commit a sexual offense on a college campus are serial offenders. So under the new Title IX rule, if one student alleged that another student committed an unwanted sexual touching in an off-campus apartment, for instance, the school would not be liable to investigate, and they might have to go to the police instead. Going off of that, colleges no longer have the obligation to investigate sexual misconduct that occurs off campus. If it's not in a sanctioned activity or program as they've defined, then the colleges actually aren't supposed to report and investigate it at all. This includes fraternities that hold unsanctioned parties. Those will no longer be covered under Title IX, nor will any sort of off-campus housing. And when I think about that in the context of my own university, I know that 50% of sexual assaults occur off campus. Yet 77% of perpetrators are Tulane students. So that 50% will be left out. And given the fact that sexual assault is already the most underreported crime in the US, that will even further push it out of the realm of reported crimes. Just going off of that, it now makes it more difficult for survivors to get justice because they have changed the standard for the burden of proof. Before the Trump administration decided to change Title IX, the use of evidence used the preponderance standard, which means that the preponderance of the evidence determined that it was more likely than not the assault occurred. And now the Department of Education has decided that evidence must be presented that is clear and convincing. It's already difficult to prove a sexual assault happened. They often turn into he said, she said situations. So adding this on top will make it increasingly difficult for women, men, and non-binary individuals to get their day in court and to get justice. As Anne mentioned, she said that she was trained to prevent sexual harassment. There are other people like that on college campuses called mandatory reporters. These include professors and residential advisors. But now the new Title IX has decided to get rid of them. This is important because mandatory reporters file informal reports. An informal report means that you don't have to necessarily go before a trial board at the university. It just documents what happened and who you are accusing of doing said act so that there's a record of it. And should another person come forward and decide to report formally, there's an informal report saying this isn't the first time, which is incredibly important knowing that most offenders are serial offenders. This also makes it incredibly difficult because even if you don't report directly to the university, if you tell a mandatory reporter, that helps document the crime, which is already incredibly underdocumented. The most important change that I see is now the existence of cross-examination, which I'm sure a lot of you can imagine why that would be problematic. It's not that they can choose whether or not cross-examination will happen during trial, it's that it's required. The Department of Education said that this is partially because they want to decrease the amount of false reports. In reality, only 2% of rape claims are falsified. Cross-examination was actually discouraged by the Obama administration because advocates for sexual assault victims said it could be traumatic and could dissuade people from coming forward. In my opinion, I totally agree with that. I'm sure that there are people that would disagree. But within the legal community, it's normally understood that this doesn't seem like a good idea. Critics also worry that cross-examination offers advantages to students who have money to have fancy lawyers. Hiring a lawyer who is competent in Title IX law is expensive. And if you are a victim, you may not have the means to do so, which would mean that you would have either an attorney that is paid for by the school, or you could just have a mentor or an advisor through the school be the person who's doing the cross-examination on your part. That detracts from the whole concept of these Title IX suits. If you're not able to advocate for yourself and your life is put under scrutiny after you've gone through a traumatic event, it just ends up causing you more and more distress. You also no longer have the option to have an informal trial or an informal resolution. All Title IX complaints now have to go through a formal trial. This will decrease reporting and increase the stress on victims. I've never been in the position where I've personally had to go through a Title IX trial, but from what I've witnessed in my own experience, it's incredibly draining, time-consuming, and often places a massive burden upon the victim who is shamed by classmates or the friends of the person that she's accusing. So keeping this all in mind, the Title IX statute that existed for many years prior to now no longer holds the same ground. The fact that victims before already weren't reporting, they will now just continue not to report because they don't feel like they're going to be supported by their university. Colleges don't have the option of whether or not they want to enact this legislation. It's required by August 14th, despite the fact that a plethora of lawsuits have been filed, including by District Attorney Javier Becerra of California. And there's around 13 other states that are in collaboration with him trying to sue Betsy DeVos and postpone this, but the government is just not listening. It's difficult to watch these changes happen and know that when I now have to explain to women that come to me who need my help, that they are going to most likely subject themselves to extreme physical and emotional trauma, it's difficult for me to be able to advocate for reporting. Prior, I was a huge fan of it, whether it be informal or formal, mostly because I know that if you report, it's likely that you get justice, whether or not you formally report. Because just making sure somebody knows that someone did something wrong holds them accountable and helps protect other women. These laws, they don't protect women anymore. They protect the perpetrators, and they plan on saving the Department of Education around $300 million. I don't know what will happen in the future with this law and how it will change, or whether or not campuses will decide to ignore it. But what I do know is that the number of women that are assaulted will just continue to grow, but the number of women who report their crimes will continue to shrink. I think that's all I have to say, and I think we're going to do questions next, if I'm correct.
Yes, thanks so much, Lily. Lot of changes. This is Ashley. I'm going to invite Anne back in. I don't see any questions posted yet, but I do encourage our participants to go down to the bottom of their screen and click on the chat. I'm seeing something now. Thank you for your recap of the changes. How long did it take you to get through those 2,000 pages?
So I believe it was released in May. Yeah, May 6th. And the minute that it came out, I started reading. Some of it I decided to skip over. There were large sections about primary education, so K through 12, and I decided to primarily focus on universities and the sexual harassment aspect rather than sports and another equal opportunity issues. So probably 2-3 weeks.
It's a lot of material. I can't even imagine trying to get through that. And do we expect our legislators to read that, or have they done that? I'm going to unmute Anne. I'm going to bring Anne back on camera. There you go, Anne. Are you there?
I am.
There we go. Great.
What I'm seeing now is that there are so many programs to educate us about these new regulations. And what's amazing to me is I was looking at one, and it starts August 6th and 7th, and it costs $700 per person. And these will all be virtual.
And I'm going to ask you to start your video. You need to do that. I don't think I can do it from here. Thank you very much.
Okay.
There she is.
So the issue is everybody's going to have to be trained, and every single Title IX coordinator will have to be trained. They haven't been trained yet up at San Diego State, and they're very concerned about what impact that'll have. So it's going to be very stressful for most of the coordinators in all of our universities and high schools too, to try to train and have everybody up to speed. By August 14th, that's not going to happen.
Julie McCain says offenses that happen off campus can be reported to local police. Yes, that's the only option. Lily, perhaps you might answer that. She goes on to say, if most offenses are not reported, where do we come up with the every 70-second statistic?
So offenses that happen off campus, yes, they may be reported to local police. That is true, or your university's police department. In the city of New Orleans, given that it is pretty overloaded with other crime, they tend to not be focused on the crime happening on 2 lanes, in the 2-lane area. We have our own police department. And reporting to the police department also means that you have to file a formal report. Normally you have to have a rape kit done, which is incredibly invasive. And it starts a different proceeding. So through the university, expulsion and suspension, things like that, those are more so within the options. But when you report to police, that's more taking it towards the criminal route of going to trial. Every university is different. They all have different standards. But regardless of what happens, if it happens off campus between 2 students, the university tends to want to deal with it in-house. And in terms of the statistic, I believe that one is from the Department of Justice. I'm unsure exactly how they came up with it. They've done quite a few different surveys over the years, and they collect a mass amount of data on when the small number of reports have happened, informal and formal, and they have gone from there. I'm sure that I can find the exact link if possible, but it's a pretty easy statistic to find and look up.
Jane has made a comment about Alicia Hetman, I believe, apparently has a very good chat or chart about the changes to Title IX. Are you familiar with Alicia Hetman at all, Lily?
I am not familiar with her.
Jane would be happy to share the chart with us later if we would like. So yes, please do.
Actually, I have talked with Alicia and I invited her to participate today, but she didn't think she'd be back in time by 5 o'clock or even by 6.
Oh,
So unfortunately, she couldn't be here, but she did send me some materials on recommendations on what we can do to really deal with this change in Title IX.
there was one question for Lily May. Someone is asking you to explain a rape kit. Are you able to do that?
I am able to do so. A rape kit is an evidence collection process that occurs after a sexual assault. For optimum evidence collection, it should occur within 24 hours of the assault happening without the survivor taking a shower, washing their body. They collect your underwear. They take swabs from under your fingers. They do an entire pelvic exam, pelvic swabs. They photograph any bruises, markings, etc. on your entire body. They swab other orifices, they take blood, they basically collect skin and hair particles on you. And they're trying to check for semen or other genetic material that may have been left. And it's incredibly, it's a very intrusive, often painful and traumatic environment. And then they also conduct an interview about what happened during the assault, trying to put together evidence to a story. And these kits, as they say, basically it comes in a box, an evidence box. They take everything that was on you. They put it in a box. Sheets on your bed if it occurred at your home. You go through the details of your night and you have to tell the story multiple times, and they record it. And it's kept in this box that can't be destroyed, that can be used for evidence in a criminal case, or even if you have one done, it may be used in a case at your university. But basically that's how they collect physical evidence when a rape occurs.
We have another question for you, Lily. Could you please explain how does a student on campus, and of course you're speaking about Tulane, know who to report to on campus?
So this is one of the things that I worked on a lot this year after my article in the newspaper at Tulane. Every college has a Title IX office. They're required to have one by law. You can report, you used to be able to report in a few different ways. First of all would be a mandatory reporter. You could go to your resident advisor or speak to a professor about what had happened to you, and they basically would say, okay, well, I need to write this up as an informal report, but we're not going to move forward with anything unless you want. And so that would be sent off. That is a form of reporting. You could report directly to the hotline at the Title IX office, which many universities, that is open 24 hours a day. It is a sexual assault hotline and for harassment as well. Or you can report directly online via the website of your university's Title IX office. Normally they have a portal where you can send almost like a confidential tip, but with information and obviously details of what happened. Or you can go in and do it that way. And you obviously can report to the police in various ways by going to the station or calling. There's various ways. You can also report at the hospital if you go to the hospital following a sexual assault. If you suffered any bodily injuries.
Well, go ahead, Anne.
At San Diego State University, they actually have 4 coordinators. One deals strictly with athletics, with the athletics department, what's going on there. Another coordinator deals with employees and personnel, student faculty. And then the third is dealing with students. And then there's an overall Title IX coordinator. So there are 4 people who are involved in all these top level issues. And then there are coordinators under those coordinators. So there are about 10 people at San Diego State dealing with this issue.
And it sounds like every college campus has to deal with this very quickly. And how much time are they going to require to do that? It's August 8th, did you say?
14.
August 14th.
August 14th. So that's coming up. So I don't have any more questions for Lily. Anything you'd like to say, Lily, as far as how you feel about the new regulations? I know Anne has some.
I think there's one more question. Linda asked if a student opted to report informally rather than formally, what services were they eligible for? Regardless of how you decide to report, at least at Tulane, there are counseling services and sexual trauma services. What I provide to the women in my Pan-Hellenic Association is basically a form of comfort and a support system. But there are more formal versions of that depending on your university. Your university may have mental health professionals that they contract out to who can deal with it. You can speak to people working in the Title IX office about how to move forward. There are a plethora of other resources, but I think that the fact that so many women decide never to talk about what happened to them, I think the statistic is 75% of college women never tell anyone about their assault, apart from if they've informally reported, et cetera, or confidentially disclosed that information. So, it makes sense why, 13% of women who are sexually assaulted attempt suicide. It's incredibly difficult to get help because it is so stigmatized, and talking about what has happened to you is one of the most difficult things that you can deal with. I know that when I speak to survivors, I tend to share my story. I give them my testimony and say, I understand how you feel right now. I may not understand exactly how you feel, but I understand that I have been in a position in which I have felt similar to what you feel now, but know you have options. I think those options differ per school. If you do not decide to report formally, at some places you may have no options. And I think that that's definitely a problem that we need to address.
I see Jane made a comment that most universities report 0 assaults every year because they don't want the bad press. So how does a potential student or family go about getting the information they need about the schools they're sending their daughters to?
I mean, Tulane is the only school, I believe, that's done a climate assessment, and it made them look very bad. It is terrifying to think that 1 in every 4 people on your campus will be a victim of sexual assault. It's not something that any parent wants to think about for their child, which is often why children don't tell their parents if they've been through a sexual trauma, because it's so stigmatized and they feel so embarrassed. And colleges don't want to be liable. It is expensive to deal with Title IX cases. And, in my opinion, it's a worthy expense. It's something that we should be spending more money on because it is such an issue. And it's the most underreported crime in America. You would think that these institutions that are forming the young minds of the future generation of leaders would want to dedicate more time to making sure that the formative years of their life were beneficial rather than traumatic. But to see that there is a disdain for that is what I find most upsetting and arguably most disappointing about the college experience.
Have you heard of any programs that actually work with the men on campus in an educational way?
So there's always that dilemma of we shouldn't be having to teach women how not to be assaulted. We should be teaching men not to assault. In my personal opinion, I think that trying to educate men on about behaving themselves is incredibly important. But I think the bad behavior comes out of a cultural dialogue that has basically victim shamed and allowed men to feel like they have impunity from having any sort of responsibility when it comes to consent. Men are often not educated well enough on consent. It's not necessarily no means no anymore. It is now yes means yes. I think that clearly times have changed because we use that terminology now. but I really don't know of any true programs that work on educating men. And as we know, sexual education in the United States in public and private schools is subpar and underfunded. So men aren't even getting the information that they should be getting, and they are seeing perpetuated scenes of sexual violence in pornography that glamorizes brutality and rape and assault. And men are often, taught that coercion is okay. It's not no, it's let me convince you. And I think that those are the major issues that should be being addressed in sex ed, but they're just not, because the US doesn't spend the money on it.
Linda Slater, I believe she's probably an AAUW member, has made the statement that it will be important for the AAUW, that's the American Association of University Women, to arm themselves with information to assist the schools in our area to comply with Title IX, to create safer and equitable education. Here to that. And that sounds like a good lead in to Anne. Lily, if you want to take a break, please stay with us if you would. I'm sure there may be more questions, but I know you've been hanging in with us for most of an hour here, so please take a rest. And Anne, I'm going to turn it back over to you to talk about the chatting over there. There we go, Anne. Are you on?
Yes, I'm going to share with you what Alicia Hedman has created. Now, she did give a presentation before a hearing at the Sacramento Capitol at the Assembly. And she came up with 5 recommendations. And she said it's so important that we have to continue with our ongoing education, just like Lily has been saying. We need more training, and we certainly need more enforcement. So her very first recommendation before the Assembly was that we really need more trainers, and we need trainers to train trainers. So we need this continuous training to go on about gender equity. And she felt that was extremely important. We need to go into our schools with the trainers and train the trainers. So another important recommendation that she came up with, and this is recommendation number 2. Here in California, Senator Hannah Beth Jackson last year came up with a comprehensive bill that provides the protections for victims of sexual harassment and assault that will be needed for institutions of higher education that receive state funds. This state bill specifically provides students to not be subjected to any form of direct life cross-examination from the accused side. So this is very contradictory as far as what Betsy DeVos has come up with. So again, I just want to emphasize this. This state bill specifically provides for students to not be subjected to any form of direct live cross-examination from the accused side. And this is a very important bill. It has not been enacted yet out of the Senate, but it is being considered. That was Alicia's second recommendation. Her third is that we really review the sexual harassment protections in the education code for students who are in K through 12. And we really need to see if new legislation is needed to strengthen protections. Every district, every college and university is required to have at least one Title IX coordinator. And that person must be fully trained and supported to fulfill the legal requirements. Now, another thing that Alicia is recommending is that we change the title. We change the title from Title IX Coordinator to Gender Equity Coordinator. Now, Title IX is a federal piece of legislation, and here in California and most other states, they have their own legislation. So by changing the title to Gender Equity Coordinator, we're covering then not only Title IX, but also state pieces of legislation. Okay, and then the next piece of recommendation is to strongly recommend that California legislators, along with the California Superintendent of Public Instruction, step up this year and provide the leadership and funding that our students deserve in California to provide employees with gender equity education, ongoing trainer programs for school personnel, and strong enforcement that will actually make a difference for all students in California. And finally, I'd just like to quote from AAUW CEO Kim Churches, and she wrote a dynamite article in Newsweek in May also. And she stresses that we know how badly survivors need protections. We cannot head back to the days when sexual misconduct was hidden under the rug. Indeed, we need to move forward toward our goals to prevent sexual harassment and assault. And when it does occur, to have fair and just systems in place for both the accused and the survivor. On the prevention front, we need to continue the hard work of changing campus culture by modernizing all policies and practices that perpetuate bias and diminish anyone based on gender. We need to focus more equitable and respectful environments in all regards. By leveling playing fields, we will shift power differentials and discourage tolerance for unacceptable behavior. And I love this. She said, we can all be upstanders, not bystanders. We need to speak up when individuals are behaving inappropriately, when people are being unduly pressured, or when someone needs support and encouragement for reporting harassment or assault. But that's not enough. We need to start smart policies and procedures in place for when problems occur. We need to keep the Me Too movement moving forward. We have learned the lessons. Survivors will not be silenced, and we hope that continues. So I thank you all for being a part of this presentation, and I especially thank Lily. Wow, this has been a really enlightening experience for all of us.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Lily. Is there
Thank you.
anybody in our audience who would like to share their Title IX story? We only have a couple of minutes left. Is there anybody who would like to? I want to thank the AAUW for taking this on and leading the charge. And I love the message from Anne saying we all have to be upstanders and taking action at whatever level we can, because it's outrageous and we just can't let it continue. And wherever that happens, whether it's in the voting booth, whether it's in your own activism or volunteerism with an organization that's doing this work, let's get it done. It's time to end it. Absolutely. Lily, any final words from you?
Somebody just asked me a question about what profession I'm pursuing. I graduate in 3 semesters. I'm graduating this semester early, and I'm trilingual. So I would like to go to Egypt and go to the American University in Cairo there to get a graduate's degree. I speak Arabic and French. And then I would love to go to law school and either pursue a law degree and then work in counterterrorism, or who knows where the wind might take me, and I might continue journalism. I love to write. I hope to write a book one day, but I'm young, so I have time.
I have a feeling you'll be writing more than one book, Lily.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much for your time, and thank you to everyone for participating in this event, and we'll be doing more as the year goes by because it's a virtual world for the moment, and I think I'm getting used to it. But thanks for your help, Lily. Thanks, Anne. Thanks, everybody, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Please come by the museum. We should be open soon.
We have some events coming up, Ashley.
Oh yeah, want to tell? So we have on the 18th. Help me out, Anne. What's going on the 18th?
Well, we're going to talk about what happened after the 19th Amendment.
Right.
What laws were changed. So we have 3 speakers lined up. We'll also talk about the importance of voting. So it's a continuation of our centennial celebration series where we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment and what happened after it.
And on the 26th, of course, that's the anniversary of the 19th Amendment being passed. And I think for the past 19 years, the Women's Museum has planned and produced a suffrage parade in Balboa Park. Unfortunately, due to the restrictions, we won't be able to do that, but we are going to do a virtual parade. So get your historic costumes ready, your hats, your sashes, your purple, your gold, your white, and join us on Zoom for stories of the suffragists. And a few of us might be brave enough to go down to the Liberty Station and parade around the promenade. But it's a secret, don't tell anybody. But there's more coming on that. So hope you'll join us and support us. It's all great work, and I'm so happy to be part of it. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.